Have you ever felt like no matter how much you explain yourself, no one truly hears you? You talk, you plead, you give reasons, you lay out your case like a lawyer in court. You replay the conversation in your head afterward, thinking, I said everything right, didn't I? And still, silence. Or worse, skepticism, dismissal, maybe even mockery. You tell a friend you're struggling with burnout, and they reply with, just take a vacation. As if a week off could untangle the knots inside your chest. You try to share a creative dream, a passion project, a business idea, and someone smirks, telling you to be realistic. You open up about past mistakes, hoping for understanding, but get cold eyes in return. There's a kind of loneliness that settles in those moments, not from being alone, but from being unseen. Maybe you've been in a relationship where you constantly had to explain your intentions. You'd go over and over again what you meant, why you said what you said, trying to clear the air. But somehow, the more you tried to explain, the less they seemed to believe you. It's like your words dissolved the moment they left your lips. Or maybe at work, you've tried to advocate for a new idea, a more ethical decision, a better approach, a fairer solution. You brought data, examples, insight, and yet your suggestions were brushed aside while someone else said the same thing later and got praised. It's not just frustrating, it's exhausting, like screaming into a void that echoes back indifference. And sometimes it's closer to home. Maybe you've tried to explain to your parents why a traditional path just doesn't fit you, or tried to show your partner that you're growing, that you're different now. But no matter how eloquent your words, the old version of you is the only one they still seem to see. Words fail in those moments, not because they weren't true or thoughtful or well-crafted, but because something else was missing, something deeper, something that can't be spoken, only lived. It's frustrating, isn't it? That aching sense that you're not being taken seriously, that your ideas, your values, your truth aren't landing, that the more you try to convince others of who you are or what you believe, the less they seem to believe it. But here's a hard truth, one many of us only learn through experience. Convincing people with words means very little when your life doesn't reflect the message. There comes a point where we have to ask ourselves, am I trying to persuade others with my voice or with my life? Because there's a difference, and it's a big one. Words can explain, but character convinces. Ralph Waldo Emerson once wrote, "What you are speaks so loudly I cannot hear what you say." That sentiment is more relevant today than ever. In a world drowning in opinions, arguments, and endless streams of information, everyone has something to say. But not everyone lives something worth listening to. And that's where the shift begins. That's where transformation takes place. Not when you master the art of persuasion, but when you master the art of integrity. Let's reflect for a moment on this quote. Character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion. These are the words of Aristotle, the ancient Greek philosopher whose teachings on rhetoric, ethics, and human behavior still echo across millennia. Now really consider what he's saying. Not charisma, not eloquence, not logic, not volume. Character. In Aristotle's rhetoric, he argued that the most convincing form of appeal isn't through logical argument, called logos, or emotional connection, also known as pathos, alone, but through ethos, the perceived credibility and moral fiber of the speaker. In other words, people believe you not just because of what you say, but because of who you are. This idea flips modern communication on its head. We live in a world obsessed with style, delivery, optics. Platforms reward cleverness, wit, and short bursts of emotionally charged language. But underneath the surface, what people are really searching for, what draws us in and makes us trust someone, is not how loud they are or how polished their words, but the strength of their character. So what does that mean in practice? It means that a quiet person with integrity will always hold more sway in the long run than a loud one with no consistency. It means that your reputation, built slowly over time through repeated actions, has more persuasive power than any one well-worded argument. It means that who you are when no one is watching becomes the silent testimony that either supports or undermines every word you speak. Think about someone in your life who doesn't talk much, but when they do, everyone listens. Why? Probably because they have a track record. They follow through. They don't say things just to hear themselves speak. Their life speaks for them. On the flip side, consider someone who always has an answer, always has a story, always has a rebuttal, but no one ever seems truly convinced. That's the consequence of speaking louder than you live. Eventually, people stop listening, not because they're rude or dismissive, but because deep down they've learned that your words aren't anchored to anything solid. Character, unlike charisma, can't be faked. You can practice charm. You can memorize facts. You can learn how to give a TED Talk. But character, that's slow-cooked. It's shaped in your habits, your sacrifices, the small choices you make when there's no applause. Let's look at some real-world examples. Take Fred Rogers, better known as Mr. Rogers. He wasn't flashy. He didn't shout. He didn't debate. But his quiet strength, kindness, and unwavering moral compass made him one of the most trusted figures in American television history. Parents believed him. Children adored him. Not because of gimmicks, but because his character radiated sincerity. Or consider Nelson Mandela. He spent 27 years in prison, and when he finally spoke to the world upon his release, people listened. Not just because of what he said, but because of what he endured. His integrity gave his voice moral weight. His actions, his patience, his restraint, his forgiveness became the bedrock of his influence. Even in our personal lives, we see it all the time. Think of a friend who never gossips behind someone's back, who returns what they borrow, who admits when they're wrong, who shows up when they say they will. They're the ones you turn to in times of confusion, not because they always have the most poetic words, but because their character makes them believable. Character makes you undeniable. It's not about being perfect, it's about being true. And in a world where everyone is trying to convince each other through debates, through social media rants, through arguments in comment sections, the rarest and most effective voice in the room is often the one backed by real-life congruence, by living in alignment with your values, by not needing to shout to be heard, because your life already speaks volumes. That is what Aristotle meant when he spoke of ethos, the persuasive power of character. Character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion, he said. Not performance, not cleverness, not strategy, but character. Influence that comes not from tactics, but from truth. In a world bursting with noise, voices trying to be louder, flashier, more convincing, the person who simply is stands out. Someone who is grounded, consistent, real. You don't need to shout when your integrity speaks louder than words ever could. So when it feels like no one's listening, when you find yourself repeating, explaining, arguing, it may not be about how you're saying it. It may be about who you are when you say it. Are you someone people believe even before you speak? Because if you are, then words become optional. Your character does the talking. Look at someone like Mr. Rogers. He didn't captivate with charisma. He didn't rely on polished language or attention-grabbing techniques. He wore soft sweaters, spoke gently, and lived what he believed. He made children feel seen, safe, and valued, not with slogans, but with presence. And decades later, people still trust that voice, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Real character cuts through the noise like a whisper in a shouting match. It's quiet, but it lingers. It changes people, not by pushing a point, but by embodying something genuine. When your actions match your words, people feel it, and they remember it. Think of someone in your life who left a deep mark. Maybe it was your grandmother who didn't preach, but showed kindness in every small act. Or a mentor who led not through instructions, but through example, steady, disciplined, fair. These are the people we trust. They don't sell themselves. They don't convince. They are the message. And here's the beautiful part. This influence doesn't require perfection. It doesn't demand that you never stumble. What it asks is honesty, integrity, the courage to admit when you're wrong, and the commitment to live your values even when it's inconvenient. That's where trust is built, not in flawless speeches, but in the consistent alignment between what you say and how you live. Let's go deeper. The gap between our words and our actions is often filled with fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of rejection, fear of failure. And so we overcompensate, we perform, we posture, we try to look successful, confident, lovable. We talk more, promote harder, filter everything. But often behind all that noise, there's a quiet anxiety. What if I'm not really who I claim to be? That fear is understandable, but if we rely only on presentation, we lose something vital. In a world that rewards the appearance of success, likes, followers, polish, it's easy to forget that real persuasion doesn't come from optics. It comes from authenticity. Eventually, people can sense the gap. Charisma and charm may impress at first, but over time what matters is trust. And trust only grows when we see someone living with integrity. Think about public figures who fell from grace, not because they said the wrong thing, but because who they were in private didn't match their public image. Their speeches were refined. Their brands were strong. But truth has a way of leaking through, and with it, our trust vanishes. Now contrast that with someone like Malala Yousafzai. She didn't campaign for fame. She simply stood for what she believed in, despite the risks. Her words carried power not because of how they were delivered, but because of the life behind them. She lived her truth and the world noticed. And there are examples all around us. The teacher who keeps showing up without applause, the friend who tells you the truth even when it's hard, the colleague who quietly does the right thing even when no one's watching. These people don't make speeches, they live one. So when Aristotle tied persuasion to character, he wasn't just giving advice for public speakers. He was pointing to something timeless. Who you are speaks before you ever open your mouth. When your words finally come, they'll carry weight, not because they're perfect, but because they're real. That's what touches people. That's what stays with them. That's what turns communication into transformation. So ask yourself, am I someone people believe? If the answer is yes, then there's no need to shout. You don't need to convince. Let your character speak. Let your life do the talking. In a world drowning in image and performance, integrity is still the rarest and most powerful form of persuasion. But we must ask, what if silence, backed by action, is louder than the most passionate defense? That doesn't mean passivity. It means rootedness. The strength of a tree is not in how many leaves it can show off in the spring. It's in how deeply its roots go in the unseen earth. Many people live performative lives. Social media makes this even easier. A few carefully crafted posts, a couple of filtered photos, and the illusion of a virtuous, successful life is complete. But true credibility doesn't come from aesthetics. It comes from alignment, inner alignment. The kind that's not curated. The kind that's cultivated in silence, through repetition, through discipline, through trials. Now, this doesn't mean words don't matter. They do. But words without substance are like a house built on sand. It might look impressive for a while. It might even attract admiration. But when pressure comes, when life hits hard, that structure collapses. Character is what holds it together. Character isn't about being nice or even being well-liked. It's about integrity. It's about whether who you are in private matches, who you are in public, whether your image lines up with your reality, whether your choices echo your convictions even when no one's watching. That's the kind of person people believe. That's the kind of life that persuades without ever needing to sell itself. Many of us spend years trying to prove our worth, trying to explain our vision, trying to justify our dreams. We believe if we say it just right, people will understand. If we say it loud enough, they'll finally believe us. But here's the truth. Most people don't need more explanation. They need evidence. They need to see who you are, not just hear who you say you are. And that begins in the quiet moments, when you do what you said you would, when you treat others well even when it cost you, when you admit your mistakes, when you choose patience over pride, consistency over convenience, truth over applause. Those moments, they're louder than any speech you could give. Take, for example, those you admire deeply. Chances are they didn't have to campaign for your respect. You gave it freely, because you witnessed them live out something real. Maybe it was how they handled disappointment without bitterness. Maybe it was how they remained calm when provoked. Maybe it was their work ethic, their patience, their empathy, their joy. Whatever it was, you believed in them, not because they told you to, but because their behavior made disbelief impossible. We live in a culture obsessed with recognition. We want to be seen, validated, applauded. But here's something liberating. You don't have to convince everyone. You just have to become someone who doesn't need to convince anyone, because your life already does. Let your work speak. Let your consistency speak. Let your peace speak. Let your integrity speak louder than your arguments. Because people are watching, not your marketing, not your monologues, but your patterns, your relationships, your reactions. They're watching how you carry yourself when no one is paying attention. In fact, the deepest trust is built in the quietest corners, in the daily decisions, in the unnoticed sacrifices, in the way you respond to pressure, in the moments when you choose decency, not because it's rewarded, but because it's right. Think of the power of integrity in leadership. The greatest leaders of history were often those whose personal conduct aligned with the ideals they espoused. Consider Nelson Mandela, whose years in prison didn't harden his resolve but refined it. Or Fred Rogers, who practiced gentleness not just on camera but also when no one was looking. They didn't just talk about change, they embodied it. In relationships too, persuasion isn't about sweet talk. It's about consistency. When someone keeps their word, shows up when it matters, listens deeply, and stays true in adversity, their influence becomes undeniable. Trust doesn't flourish in eloquence. It blooms in reliability. And in the realm of parenting or mentorship, nothing is more persuasive than example. A child doesn't follow instructions as much as they mirror character. They watch how you treat others, how you react to stress, how you honor your commitments. They learn from your integrity, not your lectures. So if you want to influence the world, your community, your inner circle, start with how you live. Let your ordinary routines be infused with extraordinary authenticity. Every time you choose kindness when it would be easier to ignore. Every time you forgive instead of retaliating. Every time you speak up for what's right, even when your voice trembles. You build a reputation stronger than any speech could deliver. Reputation is merely the echo of your character in the hearts of others. The quote still rings in my mind over and over again. Character may almost be called the most effective means of persuasion. It's not just a line, it's a compass, because your life is already persuading people of something. Every moment, every habit, every choice, it's telling a story. What story are you telling? Are you persuading people to believe in compassion, in resilience, in truth? Or are you unintentionally persuading them that image matters more than authenticity? Only you know. And only you can change it. You don't have to have the loudest voice. You don't need the perfect words. You just need to let your life speak. Because when your life becomes the message, you don't have to convince anyone. They'll already know.